You built 60 homes without securing a road, Marlene, and now the lock belongs to me. At 6:02 on a cold Tuesday morning, the steel chain scraped across the old cattle gate, sending a metallic shiver through Coyote Ridge Ranch. I stood beside Sheriff Lucas Hale with a certified court order tucked beneath my arm and my father's brass key pressed into my palm. Beyond the gate, 60 sets of headlights glowed through the pale Texas dust. Engines idled. Turn signals clicked. A sprinkler hissed across a lawn that had been planted where my grandfather once grazed cattle. Then a white Cadillac Escalade rushed up the hill and stopped inches from the painted boundary line. Marlene Whitaker climbed out wearing a fuchsia suit, oversized gold bracelets, and enough perfume to overpower the smell of cold asphalt. Her heels struck the pavement like tiny gavels as she marched toward me with her phone already recording. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "You just trapped 60 families inside their own neighborhood." I looked past her at the line of cars stretching toward the identical stone entrance pillars. Nobody was trapped. The county had opened a temporary access lane on the east side before sunrise, and every homeowner had received written notice 48 hours earlier. Emergency vehicles had their own secured route. Marlene knew all of that. What she had not expected was for me to close the road before she could file another motion, call another meeting, or tell another camera that I was some greedy rancher holding innocent families hostage. I unfolded the court order and placed it on the warm hood of her Escalade. The paper fluttered once in the wind before settling beneath my hand. The judge's seal rested at the bottom in dark blue ink, quiet and official. Real authority did not need a designer suit, a raised voice, or a neighborhood newsletter filled with half-truths. "No, Marlene," I said. "I closed a private ranch road that your HOA never owned." Her smile stiffened. Her bracelets clicked together as she reached for the order. For 6 weeks, she had called me a trespasser, a blackmailer, and an obstacle to progress. She had sued me for interfering with a luxury community that existed only because a developer had paved across my south pasture and assumed nobody would ever check the original survey. What Marlene did not know when she filed that lawsuit was that discovery worked both ways. By dragging me into court, she had forced her own HOA to surrender the temporary construction permit, the expired access agreement, and an email she believed had disappeared years ago. I still remembered the sentence she had written. "Once enough families move in, no rancher will dare close the gate." I carried a printed copy in my jacket pocket. Now the brass key my father left behind felt cold and heavy between my fingers. Marlene stared at it, then at the chain, then at the judge's seal. The morning went silent except for idling engines and the soft ticking of her cooling hood. For the first time since I met her, Marlene Whitaker had nothing to say. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. 6 weeks earlier, I had not even known Mesa Vista existed. I had driven out to the south pasture just after sunrise to check a section of fence the wind had pulled loose during the night. The sky was the color of cold steel, and the air carried the dry smell of cedar, sagebrush, and dust. My tires crunched over the narrow ranch track my grandfather cut in the 1980s, the same route my father used when he checked cattle before breakfast. I knew every bend in that road. I knew where the ground dipped near the wash, where the fence leaned beside the limestone ridge, and where the old brass survey marker sat beneath a stand of scrub oak. At least, I thought I did. When I reached the top of the ridge, the familiar smell of dry grass disappeared beneath hot asphalt and fresh-cut sod. I stopped the truck so suddenly that my coffee slid out of the cup holder and splashed across the rubber floor mat. Below me, where open pasture should have stretched toward the county line, stood rows of new houses with matching stone fronts, gray roofs, white garage doors, and trimmed lawns shining under automatic sprinklers. Mailboxes lined both sides of a smooth black road. Streetlights stood every 100 feet. A wooden sign near the entrance read Mesa Vista Estates in gold lettering. I counted the roofs twice before I believed the number. 60 homes, 60 driveways, 60 backyards pressed together across land that had been part of Coyote Ridge Ranch since my grandfather bought it. The houses were not abandoned shells or construction frames. Curtains hung in windows. Children's bicycles leaned against garages. A delivery van rolled through the intersection and turned toward a cul-de-sac that did not appear on any map in my office. For a few seconds, I simply sat behind the wheel, listening to the engine tick and the sprinkler heads click in the distance. Then I noticed the road. It entered the neighborhood through the exact location of our old cattle gate. The gate itself was gone. The cedar posts had been cut flush with the ground, and the ranch track had been widened into 2 full lanes of pavement. I stepped out of the truck. Gravel shifted beneath my boots as I walked toward the shoulder. The asphalt still held the morning coolness, but the smell of tar rose through it like something buried too quickly. Near the edge of the road, half covered by mud and crushed limestone, a dull piece of metal caught the light. I knelt and pulled it free. It was a brass survey pin, bent at the top, with the code C-117 stamped along the side. I recognized it immediately. My father had shown it to me when I was 12. He had placed my hand over that marker and told me the south boundary would still be there long after both of us were gone. I wiped the mud away with my thumb and stared at the fresh tire marks running across it. Somebody had not merely crossed our property line. Somebody had paved over it, sold homes behind it, and counted on my family never coming back to look. The first vehicle to reach me was not a county truck, a survey crew, or anyone interested in explaining why 60 houses were sitting behind my fence line. It was a white Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows and polished wheels that caught the morning sun like mirrors. The driver stopped beside the road, left the engine running, and stepped out with the kind of confidence that usually belongs to someone who has never been told no. Marlene Whitaker wore a bright purple suit, oversized sunglasses, and gold bracelets that clicked against one another when she raised her hand. Her perfume reached me before her voice did, thick and expensive, cutting through the smell of asphalt and wet grass. "Can I help you?" she asked, but there was nothing helpful in the way she said it. I still had the bent survey pin in my hand. "I was about to ask you the same thing." She looked at my work boots, my dusty jacket, and the old ranch truck parked on the shoulder. Her mouth tightened into a polite little smile. "This is private property. Mesa Vista residents only." I turned slowly and looked over the rooftops, the sprinklers, and the stone entrance sign. "That is interesting," I said, "because according to the deed in my office, this is Coyote Ridge Ranch." Her smile did not disappear. It sharpened. She removed her sunglasses and studied me like I was an unexpected stain on a clean tablecloth. "And you are?" "Grant Calloway." The name landed harder than I expected. Her fingers stopped moving against the bracelets. Only for a second, but I noticed. Then she recovered and reached into a leather folder under her arm. "Well, Mr. Calloway, whatever history your family may have had with this area, Mesa Vista Estates is fully approved, fully occupied, and protected by recorded community documents." She handed me a white sheet with the Homeowners Association seal printed across the top. It was a notice ordering me to leave immediately for unauthorized entry. I read it once. Then again. The paper smelled like fresh toner. "You printed a trespass notice for me while I was standing on my own land. You are standing inside our community boundary," she said. "That makes you the trespasser." A lawnmower hummed somewhere behind her. A garage door rolled open. 2 residents slowed near the intersection, watching us from inside their cars. Marlene noticed them too, and her posture grew taller. She liked an audience. "These families paid for peace, security, and property values," she continued. "They do not need a rancher wandering through the neighborhood, making wild ownership claims." I held up the brass marker. "This is not a wild claim. This is a recorded boundary pin." Her eyes moved to the stamped code, then away too quickly. "Old markers are unreliable. Not when they match the county plat." She gave a small laugh. "Land does not stay yours just because your family forgot to use it." That sentence told me more than every page in her folder. She knew there had been ranch land here. She knew my family name. And she knew enough about the boundary to be nervous about a piece of brass pulled from the mud. I folded her notice once and placed it inside my jacket. "Send me the deed, the recorded easement, and every access agreement tied to this road." Her smile returned, smooth and practiced. "You will need to speak with our attorney." "Good," I said. "Tell your attorney to bring a survey map." I walked back toward my truck while her bracelets clicked behind me. Before I opened the door, she called out, "Mr. Calloway, I suggest you let this go." I looked down at the bent marker in my palm. "That depends," I said. "How attached are you to this road?" 3 days later, a process server arrived at Coyote Ridge Ranch before I had finished my first cup of coffee. His sedan rolled through the front gate at 8:14 in the morning, tires whispering over the gravel, and stopped beside the porch where my father used to leave his muddy boots. The man stepped out carrying a thick envelope with my name printed across the front. He looked uncomfortable before he even spoke. Grant Calloway? I nodded. You have been served. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Fresh ink and warm toner rose from the pages when I opened it at the kitchen table. Mesa Vista Estates Homeowners Association was suing me for interfering with residential access, threatening property values, harassing homeowners, and attempting to obstruct what they called a long-established community roadway. The complaint was nearly an inch thick. Marlene had managed to turn one conversation beside a survey marker into a full legal emergency. By noon, my attorney, Nora Bennett, was sitting across from me with the lawsuit spread between two coffee mugs. Nora had handled ranch boundaries, mineral rights, and easement disputes across Texas for 20 years. She read quietly, tapping one finger against the table whenever she found something that bothered her. They are asking for a temporary restraining order, she said. They want the court to prevent you from touching the road, the entrance sign, or anything within 50 feet of the pavement. The pavement is on my land. That may be true, but the judge will focus on immediate harm. 60 families depend on that road. The words settled into the room with the slow hum of the refrigerator. Marlene had placed the residence between me and my own property line, then dared me to move. The hearing took place 2 days later in a county courtroom that smelled of old wood, carpet cleaner, and paper files. Marlene arrived in a bright coral dress with 3 board members and an attorney named Preston Vale. She sat behind him with her hands folded over a leather purse, wearing the calm expression of someone who had already written the ending. Preston displayed photographs of school buses, delivery trucks, and families driving through the Mesa Vista entrance. He called the road essential, established, and relied upon in good faith. He never showed a deed. He never showed a permanent easement. He simply showed 60 households and asked the judge to imagine what would happen if I closed the gate. Nora presented my ranch deed and the original county plat, but the judge raised one hand. Ownership will be determined after a full review. Until then, the access must remain open. The temporary order came down 15 minutes later. I could not block the road, install a gate, move the sign, or interfere with traffic while the case was pending. Outside the courthouse, Marlene waited near her Escalade as local residents gathered around her. She told them I had tried to strand their children, stop emergency vehicles, and force every homeowner to pay me for passage. None of it was true, but truth was slower than a neighborhood rumor. Cameras turned toward me. A man in a Mesa Vista polo shirt asked how I could hold innocent families hostage over an old ranch claim. I said nothing. Nora touched my arm and guided me toward the parking lot. Behind us, Marlene's voice carried across the concrete steps, polished and certain. The court protected our community today. I looked at the order in my hand, then at the road map folded beneath it. She thought the judge had given her the road. What the judge had really given us was time, discovery, and the legal right to open every file Marlene wanted kept closed. The first document from Marlene's legal team arrived the following Monday, and for several minutes, it looked like the piece of paper that could end my case. Nora spread it across the conference table beneath a brass lamp. It was a recorded development map stamped by the county clerk 7 years earlier. A bold line ran from the public highway, across my south pasture, and into Mesa Vista. Beside it were 3 words, Mesa Vista Access. Preston Vale had circled those words in red and attached a letter claiming the map proved permanent use of the road. Nora leaned back in her chair. The faint smell of rain drifted through the open window, mixing with coffee and printer ink. A recorded map can carry weight, she said. If your father approved this access, we may still own the ground, but we could lose control of the road. I stared at his name printed near the bottom of the page. Walter Calloway. The signature looked close enough to make my stomach tighten. My father had never mentioned an agreement with a developer. Still, the last 2 years of his life had been filled with medical appointments, unpaid bills, and decisions he sometimes kept to himself because he thought protecting me meant carrying every problem alone. I drove home under a low gray sky, hearing Marlene's courthouse speech replay in my head. Maybe she had been arrogant because she possessed something real. Maybe the road had not been stolen. Maybe my father had signed it away before I returned to manage the ranch. The thought followed me into the old equipment barn behind the house. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight. The place smelled of dry lumber, machine oil, and the leather gloves my father used until the palms turned smooth. His records were stored in dented metal cabinets, wooden crates, and cardboard boxes labeled in black marker. Tax receipts, grazing leases, well inspections, fence invoices. I searched until sunset stained the barn windows orange. Nothing explained the road. Then I remembered the green toolbox beneath his workbench. It had not held tools since I was a teenager. The lid opened with a dry squeal, revealing folded maps, a brass gate key, and an envelope from Redstone Development Company. Inside was a 6-page agreement dated 7 years earlier. My father had signed it, but not for permanent access. He had granted the developer permission to move construction vehicles across a 12-foot ranch track while a separate public entrance was being designed. The language was narrow and exact. Temporary construction access only. No permanent easement conveyed. The permission ended when the 50th home received its certificate of occupancy or after 36 months, whichever occurred first. Mesa Vista had 60 occupied homes. The agreement had expired more than 4 years ago. I checked the county map again and noticed what Preston had left outside his red circle. In tiny print beneath the road label were the words subject to separate temporary license. The map had not defeated my claim. It pointed directly to the document that proved it. I carried the agreement to the kitchen and called Nora. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you found something." I set my father's brass key beside the final page. "I found the road," I said, "and I found the date they lost it." By Wednesday morning, Nora had turned my father's 6-page agreement into a discovery request sharp enough to cut through 7 years of excuses. She demanded every email, board minute, development memo, engineering note, and access document connected to Mesa Vista Road. Preston Vale objected to almost all of it. He called the request excessive, burdensome, and irrelevant. The judge disagreed. 2 days later, a courier delivered 4 bankers' boxes to Nora's office. The cardboard smelled damp, the metal clips were rusted, and somebody had packed the files in no particular order. That was not an accident. Confusion was the last defense of people who had already run out of facts. Nora, her paralegal, and I worked through the boxes until the windows reflected darkness. We found invoices for paving, drainage plans, construction schedules, and homeowners association newsletters praising Marlene for securing reliable neighborhood access. None of them contained a permanent easement. Near midnight, I opened a folder labeled Phase 4 Traffic Planning. Inside was a printed email chain between Redstone Development and Marlene Whitaker. The first message came from a project manager named Calvin Reese, dated 4 years earlier. He warned that the temporary ranch access would expire when the 50th certificate of occupancy was issued. He estimated that building the planned eastern entrance would cost nearly $3 million because the route crossed a drainage channel and required a county bridge permit. He recommended disclosing the issue before more homes were sold. Marlene's reply was 3 sentences long. Delay the eastern road. Keep sales moving. Once enough families live there, no rancher will dare shut us out. I read it twice. The room seemed to narrow around the paper. The air conditioner hummed above us, and Nora's pen stopped moving. "She knew," I said. Nora nodded. "Before the last 10 homes were sold." Beneath that exchange was another email from Marlene to the Mesa Vista board. It described the access concern as a minor technical matter already resolved. No deed was attached. No legal opinion supported the claim. She had told the board what they needed to hear and counted on the residents never seeing the documents underneath it. The next morning, Linda Shaw called Nora's office. Linda was the Homeowners Association treasurer, a soft-spoken accountant in her early 60s who had sat behind Marlene at the courthouse without saying a word. Her voice trembled when Nora placed the call on speaker. "I need to show you something," she said. She arrived an hour later carrying a blue binder pressed against her chest. Inside were financial statements showing that Marlene had transferred more than $180,000 from the road reserve into legal expenses without a full board vote. That reserve had been created to help finance the eastern entrance. Linda had questioned the transfers and received a written warning accusing her of undermining community leadership. "The homeowners think this lawsuit is protecting them," she said. "They do not know Marlene rejected the road project. They do not know she spent the money meant to build it." I slid a copy of the expired agreement across the table. Linda stared at the termination clause, then at Marlene's email. Her face lost color. "She told us your father gave the road to the community. He gave the developer 36 months, I said. They took 7 years. Linda closed the binder carefully. What happens now? Nora looked at me, but I was still staring at Marlene's sentence. No rancher will dare shut us out. She had used 60 families as insurance against the truth. Now her own lawsuit had handed us the policy, the receipts, and her signature at the bottom. The offer went out the next morning on plain white paper, not because Marlene deserved another chance, but because 60 families had bought homes believing the road was secure. Nora drafted a temporary access license that would keep the entrance open for 30 days at no charge. In return, the Homeowners Association had to disclose the expired agreement, withdraw every false claim against me, and require Redstone Development to begin work on the Eastern Road. The county would supervise the new route. Emergency access would remain protected. Nobody would lose a driveway, miss a school bus, or wake up wondering whether an ambulance could reach them. It was the cleanest solution Marlene was ever going to receive. We delivered it during an emergency board meeting at the Mesa Vista Clubhouse on Thursday evening. The room smelled of lemon cleaner, burnt coffee, and nervous sweat. Folding chairs filled every open space. Residents lined the back wall, while Linda Shaw sat near the front with her blue financial binder resting on her lap. Marlene stood behind a polished wooden table in a bright turquoise jacket, gold earrings swinging each time she turned her head. She had hired someone to record the meeting, expecting another performance she could control. Nora placed the offer in front of her. 30 days of free access, she said. That gives the developer time to begin a lawful alternative. Marlene did not open the document. There is no need for an alternative. The road belongs to this community. Nora set a copy of the temporary agreement beside it. Your own records say otherwise. A murmur moved through the room like wind through dry grass. Marlene raised one hand. These people did not come here to listen to technical intimidation. I remained seated. Then read them the expiration clause. Her eyes found mine. The smile she gave me was thin and polished. You are bluffing, Mr. Calloway. You would never close the only usable entrance to 60 homes. I am offering you 30 days. You are asking us to admit that your neglected ranch matters more than this community. Linda opened her binder. He is asking us to tell the truth. The room went still. Marlene turned toward her. This is not your discussion. I am the treasurer, Linda said. You spent the road reserve on this lawsuit. That makes it my discussion. Marlene's bracelet struck the table when she planted both hands on its surface. The board rejects the proposal. Nora glanced at the camera. For the record, are you rejecting temporary free access and refusing to pursue the eastern route? Marlene looked directly into the lens. Yes, because Grant Calloway will never close that gate. I heard the click of Nora's pen. That single word finished more work than an hour of argument ever could. The following day, I met Sheriff Lucas Hale, the county fire marshal, and 2 transportation engineers near the east drainage channel. Boots pressed into damp red soil, while survey flags snapped in the wind. By sunset, the county had approved a temporary gravel lane for residents and a separate secured route for emergency vehicles. Notices went to every household 48 hours before the hearing. School transportation received a revised pickup point. Delivery services received a map. Marlene had tried to make safety her shield. We removed it carefully, legally, and in writing. On Monday, Nora filed the recorded refusal, the expired license, the hidden emails, and the county access plan with the court. I placed my father's brass key beside the new steel lock on my kitchen table. Marlene still believed I needed her permission to protect my land. All I needed now was the judge's signature. The judge signed the order at 4:37 on Monday afternoon. Nora called before the ink had dried. Her voice was steady, but I could hear papers moving quickly across her desk. You have the right to terminate ordinary access after the notice period, she said. The Homeowners Association never received a permanent easement. The temporary license expired years ago, and the court found that Marlene knew it. I stood alone in my kitchen with my father's brass key beside the new steel lock. Outside, evening wind moved through the cedar trees and carried the smell of dust across the porch. For a moment, I said nothing. I had imagined that call every night since I found the bent survey marker, but victory did not feel loud. It felt precise. By sunrise Tuesday, Sheriff Lucas Hale had posted the certified order on the gate. The county transportation crew had already opened the temporary gravel lane on the east side. and emergency vehicles had a separate secured route marked with reflective signs. Every resident had received maps, school bus instructions, and a written explanation. Marlene had spent weeks telling people I wanted chaos. Instead, she arrived to find traffic cones, county employees, and a process organized down to the last turn signal. At 6 o'clock, I pulled the chain through the old cattle gate. The steel dragged across the hinge with a sound I remembered from childhood. 2 minutes later, headlights began gathering on the neighborhood side. Then Marlene's white Escalade came up the hill. She stopped over the faded boundary line and stepped out in that bright fuchsia suit, gold bracelets flashing beneath the morning sun. "You cannot do this," she said. "I already did," I answered. She pointed toward the waiting cars. "These families have rights." "They do. That is why the county built them a temporary route after you rejected 30 days of free access." Sheriff Hale stepped closer and held out another copy of the order. Marlene barely looked at it. "Arrest him," she said. The sheriff glanced at the gate, then at the seal on the page. "For securing his own property under a court order?" Her face tightened. "This is our road." "No, ma'am," he said. "It is his land." The sentence settled over the pavement. Behind her, car doors opened and residents began walking closer. Linda Shaw stood near the front with the blue financial binder under one arm. Marlene turned toward them, trying to recover the room she no longer controlled. She started talking about legal appeals, temporary setbacks, and community unity. Linda opened the binder and held up the email Marlene had written years earlier. "Tell them what you knew when the 50th house sold," she said. Marlene stopped. I reached into my jacket and removed the bent brass survey pin marked C-117. I set it carefully on the hood of her Escalade beside the court order. The metal clicked against the paint. "You kept asking where my boundary was," I said. "You parked on it." Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. The only sound was the soft ticking of the Cadillac engine and the wind moving through the dry grass beyond the road. I slid my father's key into the new lock. It turned smoothly. The gate was finally closed, not to punish 60 families, but to end 7 years of pretending that my land belonged to whoever spoke the loudest. The gate remained closed for 9 days. That was all it took for Redstone Development, its insurance carrier, and the Mesa Vista homeowners to understand that Marlene could no longer solve the problem with speeches. The temporary gravel lane kept traffic moving, but it was narrow, dusty, and expensive to maintain. Every morning, county trucks rolled across the eastern drainage channel, while survey crews marked the route for a permanent road. The air smelled of wet soil, diesel fuel, and freshly cut cedar. Nobody lost access to a home. No emergency vehicle was delayed. The only thing that disappeared was the story that Marlene had been protecting the neighborhood. Linda released the financial records at a special homeowners association meeting. The room filled before sunset. Residents learned that Marlene had known the ranch license was temporary, rejected the eastern entrance, and spent more than $180,000 from the road reserve on a lawsuit designed to hide those decisions. The vote to remove her was not close. She left the clubhouse through a side door wearing a cream-colored coat and carrying the same leather folder she once used to order me off my own land. This time, nobody followed her. Redstone agreed to fund the permanent eastern road, repay the diverted reserve, cover my legal expenses, and compensate me for years of unauthorized use across the south pasture. I did not demand anyone's house. I did not ask 60 families to pay for a mistake they had not created. Their deeds remained intact. Their children kept riding the same school buses. Their lives continued, only now with a road built on land the developer actually owned. A month later, heavy equipment peeled the old asphalt away from the ranch entrance. The grinding sound carried across the ridge from sunrise until late afternoon. Underneath the pavement, the soil was packed hard, but it was still there. Owen Price helped me reset the brass marker marked C-117 in its original location. When the pins settled into the ground, I felt the small, solid tap travel through the handle of the tool and into my palms. My father had been right. Boundaries survive longer than people expect. By spring, grass had begun pushing through the repaired pasture. I rebuilt the cedar fence, rehung the cattle gate, and placed the bent survey pin on a shelf inside the equipment barn. My father's brass key hangs above it now, catching a strip of afternoon sunlight through the dusty window. I kept both because justice rarely looks dramatic when it finally arrives. Sometimes it is only an old agreement, an honest witness, and a lock turned by the person who should have held the key all along. Marlene believed 60 rooftops could erase a property line. She believed enough money, paperwork, and frightened families would make the truth too inconvenient to enforce. She was wrong. The truth did not need to shout. It only needed someone patient enough to uncover it and steady enough to stand beside it. What do you think I should have done differently? And would you have offered Marlene those 30 free days after learning what she had hidden? Share your thoughts below. And if stories about ordinary people using patience, evidence, and the law to stand up to false authority means something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories where the loudest person in the room discovers that real power has been quiet the whole time.